Welcome everyone to another edition of the Classic Comic Archive, a series where I recap and review many of Marvel Comics' most seminal early issues. Our story for today is Fantastic Four number 1, cover dated November of 1961. This issue marks the first appearance of the Fantastic Four, as well as their longtime villain Mole Man. The issue was written by Stan Lee and drawn by Jack Kirby. Our story opens up with a mysterious message emblazoned over the streets of Central City, California. A crowd below begins fearfully wondering what it could mean, with some even assuming that it's signaling a coming alien invasion. Yet they're so focused on the message itself that they fail to notice a thin trail of smoke leading into the window of a nearby skyscraper. Inside stands a lone figure, still holding the flare gun with which he'd released his call to action. But before we can learn who this man is, the issue suddenly shifts focus to another part of town, where a woman named Sue Storm is enjoying a luncheon with her friend. Yet the pair's get-together is then interrupted by the sudden appearance of the message outside. While her friend is left startled by the sight, Sue is one of only a select few who understand its meaning. Whatever it may be, it compels her to suddenly turn invisible and leave without explanation. She heads off to an unknown location and is mistaken for a ghost as she bumps into streetgoers on her way to an empty taxi. She enters the cab unnoticed, but its driver then happens to begin cruising around the city. But when he passes by her destination, she requests a stop and tries to hand him her fare. Yet all he can see is a bill inexplicably floating in midair and is thus frightened into speeding away. This encounter confirms to Sue that she's truly invisible and can thus proceed with her mission. But before we learn what it is, the issue shifts focus again, this time to a men's clothing store in another part of town. It's there that we see a rather large gentleman as he's attempting to purchase a shirt. Yet the shopkeeper informs him that they simply don't carry any clothes in his size. But clothes are the least of the gentleman's concerns, as he then notices the mysterious message in the sky. Like Sue before him, he understands its meaning and thus races off to the same location. Yet as he tears off his oversized coat, revealing underneath a massive rocky form. He's so large that the shop's door is too small for him to fit through and is thus forced to crash his way onto the street, although this begs the question of how he got inside in the first place. Regardless, his monstrous appearance and disregard for doors draws the attention of a pair of nearby policemen. They immediately assume him to be a threat and thus pull out their guns. They order him to halt, but his calling is urgent and he ignores the order. So a policeman opens fire, but misses his first shot. Yet he doesn't get a chance to fire a second, as the orange thing then effortlessly rips out a manhole cover and escapes into the sewers. He floats down its river until he's directly under his destination. But there's no manhole to climb back up, so the thing instead opts to crash his way onto the surface. He emerges onto a busy street, where an incoming car smashes right into him. Yet only the car is damaged, as the thing amazingly blocks it from even nudging him. He then fully climbs onto the street, where terrified pedestrians assume him to be a monster or an invading alien. But the issue then shifts forward several minutes later as the riot squad has arrived on the scene, yet only to find it empty, presumably because the thing has scared everyone away. But the issue then shifts focus once again, this time to a nearby service station, where teenager Johnny Storm is having his car fixed. Yet he doesn't remain there long, as he notices the message in the sky, which at this point has transformed into a single number 4. He's the last to know of its true meaning, as his body suddenly bursts into flame. He melts a hole right through his car's roof and amazingly flies away. Like a blazing comet he then soars through the sky, leaving awe-stricken crowds in his wake. Yet they're not the only ones to notice him, as so does the mayor of Central City. For all he knows, Johnny is an unidentified flying object and a potential threat. So he issues an emergency order that activates the California Air National Guard, which scrambles an attack squadron to intercept the teenager. They quickly reach him, but approach too close for his comfort. While he doesn't want to harm them, he releases a torrent of heat that melts the jets. Luckily, all of the pilots are able to safely eject. But before he was downed, one managed to fire off a heat-seeking missile that's now barreling towards Johnny. The teenager desperately tries to outrace it, but it's simply too fast for him. Yet he's then suddenly saved by the outstretched hands of two unnaturally long arms. They grab a hold of the missile and mightily hurl it offshore, where it harmlessly explodes in the ocean. But at the same time, Johnny's flame starts to flicker out. Without it he can't fly, and thus begins plummeting towards the cavernous streets below. But he's once again saved by the incredibly elastic man, who turns his body into a stretchy rope that the teenager grabs onto. With him in tow, the man enters a nearby window, where he's met by Sue Storm and the Thing. Thus it becomes obvious that this group is the Fantastic Four, summoned by the message. But with that, the issue shifts back in time to show the team's origins, as gathered in a room are its 4 members before they got their powers. We first see Ben Grimm, who's rebuking his friend Dr. Reed Richards. Ben was a renowned Air Force pilot and has been asked by Reed to fly his experimental spacecraft. This was a time when the United States was embroiled in the space race, and thus Reed, an ardent patriot and veteran himself, is determined to help his country win. To this end, he's built a spaceship for the government. But he's frustrated with the slow initiative of its bureaucracy and fears that any moment wasted is an opportunity for the Soviets to reach space first. Thus he's decided to launch the ship without the government's approval, but he needs a pilot. Yet Ben refuses, as he knows that Reed has failed to properly study the effects of cosmic radiation, which the pair are likely to encounter in space. But it's then that Reed's girlfriend Sue speaks up and brands Ben a coward for his refusal. Thus a headstrong and prideful Ben goes against his better judgment and agrees to pilot the ship, as he won't let anyone think he's a coward. So Reed and Ben head off to the ship's launch site, yet they're also joined by Sue and her younger brother Johnny. While it's not clear what service they'd provide on board, the siblings insist on coming along, which a reluctant Reed agrees to. Thus the 4 quickly arrive at the launch site and sneak on board the ship. Without wasting any time, they start it up and begin soaring into space. Yet just as Ben predicted, they're quickly bombarded by cosmic radiation which penetrates their ship's shielding. Its effects are felt immediately, as Sue begins reeling from a massive headache, Johnny's body inexplicably starts smoking, and Ben's arms become too heavy for him to steer the ship. Its autopilot then takes over and returns the 4 to Earth, albeit in a rough landing. They've ended up in a desolate area of wilderness, where the effects of the cosmic radiation truly emerge. Sue is the first to transform, as she unwittingly begins turning invisible. This strange new power is beyond her control, and thus returns her to normal only moments later. Reed is relieved to know she's alright, but Ben then angrily points out that she might not be, and neither might them all, as thanks to his carelessness they don't know what effects the radiation had on them. Reed and Ben thus begin a bickering match that turns into an all-out brawl. But just as Ben is about to throw the first punch, his body suddenly starts transforming into the monstrous figure we'd seen earlier. It seems that Ben doesn't even notice the transformation, as he then rips a tree clean off of its roots without batting an eye. He mightily swings his new club at Reed, but the scientist is able to dodge it by unnaturally stretching his body out of the way. Yet neither seem to care, as they mindlessly continue their childish brawl. But as they do, Johnny's body suddenly bursts into flames. Unlike the other 3, he actually seems to enjoy his newfound power and begins ecstatically zipping through the air. Yet as he does, he fails to notice the flame he's accidentally spitting onto the underbrush beneath him. It forms a vibrant but contained fire that engulfs the surrounding area. Luckily its fervent heat and shimmering light snaps Reed and Ben back to reality. They stop their fight, and the former takes the opportunity to speak up and deliver a classic hero speech about responsibility. But Ben interrupts him halfway through, as they've all heard it before and already know what he's going to say. So just like that, the matter is settled, and the 4 pledge their newfound powers towards the betterment of mankind. But of course they must first pick out flashy names. Johnny settles on the Human Torch, Sue the Invisible Girl, Reed Mr. Fantastic, and Ben the Thing, which Sue had earlier called him when he first transformed. But with that, the issue returns to the present, yet not before showing a striking splash panel, teasing the Fantastic Four's coming battle with the mysterious Mole Man. But to understand how the team got to this point, we must watch as Reed passes out several photographs. They're of nuclear power plants from around the world. Or at least what's left of them, as they've all been inexplicably swallowed into the ground itself. But it's then that a nearby radar machine goes off, signaling that another cave-in is about to take place. Thus the issue shifts focus to a power plant in a French African colony. It's there that several guards are nearly consumed by a massive sinkhole that suddenly appears and brings down with it the plant. Yet its destruction is the least of their concerns, as emerging from the sinkhole is a massive green monster. The guards open fire on the beast, yet their bullets ping harmlessly off it. They then scramble to fire their artillery and tanks, but they too prove useless against the monster. It in turn destroys the guards' armament and sends them fleeing. While it seems that nothing can stop this mysterious beast, a silhouetted hunchback then emerges from the sinkhole and orders it to return from whence it came. But before we can see if this command was successful, the issue shifts focus back to the Fantastic Four, who have just witnessed the events in Africa through their radar machine. Reed explains that he's been studying the many disasters and has pinpointed their source to a remote island known as Monster Isle. But Ben scoffs at the idea, as he thinks that the legendary land is nothing but a myth. Thus the only way to discover the truth is to travel there, which the Fantastic Four do, courtesy of their private jet. And sure enough, it's real and befitting of its name, for as soon as the team disembark to explore, they're confronted by a gigantic three-headed monster. It begins fearsomely pursuing Sue, who by this point can voluntarily trigger her powers. And of course she does, leaving a now bewildered monster vulnerable to an attack by Reed, who uses an elongated arm as a lasso to wrangle it into the ocean. Yet it's then that the ground beneath Reed and Johnny suddenly collapses, sending them careening down an unnaturally long chasm. Luckily Reed is quickly able to grab a hold of Johnny and turn his body into a parachute, which harmlessly glides the pair to the chasm's bottom. No sunlight penetrates this abyss, so Johnny begins aimlessly feeling around for an exit. Yet he discovers more than he'd bargained for, as he inadvertently opens a hidden trapdoor. On the other side is a blinding light, so powerful that its glare knocks them both out. They awaken sometime later, but find that they've been outfitted in strange blue suits. Greeting them is a mysterious voice, who reveals that they'd stumbled onto an underground valley of massive diamonds. The suits they're wearing protect them from its glare, enough that they can now lay eyes on their captor, the Mole Man. But the issue then shifts focus to Sue, who's desperately trying to find Reed and Johnny through the chasm's darkness. Yet what she doesn't notice is another monster sneaking up from behind. Its hide is thick and rocky, the perfect match for the Thing, who notices it before Sue and thus leaps to save her. While the monster is as fearsome as they come, the Thing easily subdues it and, like Reed, tosses it into the ocean, as apparently none of these monsters can swim. Regardless, he and Sue then race off to find their lost teammates. But speaking of, the issue then shifts focus back to Johnny and Reed, who have been taken by the Mole Man into his throne room. Naturally the pair are confused, and thus ask him where they are and who he is. The Mole Man obliges their curiosity and divulges his origin. He explains that he was once just a man living on the surface, but a societal outcast due to his gruesome appearance. After a lifetime of ridicule and rejection, he abandoned humanity and set off to find the legendary Monster Isle, a land where he could be king. Thus he tirelessly traveled all over the world, and when all hope seemed lost, he finally found it. Yet he wasn't immune to its peril, and lost most of his eyesight in a cave collapse while exploring its vast network of underground tunnels. But it was there that he discovered the monsters hiding within, and somehow grew to be their master. He also overcame his near blindness, as he developed an uncanny radar sense that allows him to see in the darkness and detect incoming danger. He seems to be especially proud of this, as he tosses Reed a fighting staff and orders the scientist to strike at him. Reed obliges, but his attack is quickly blocked. He then tries to swipe at the Mole Man's feet, yet the hunchback is surprisingly agile and dodges it. Reed is then put on the defensive, but proves no match against the Mole Man's strange abilities. Yet with that, it seems that the Mole Man has had his fun, as he declares his intention to slay the two intruders. But in classic villain fashion, he first opts to reveal to them his evil plan. He explains that he's carved underground tunnels underneath every nuclear power plant in the world. And once he's destroyed them all, he'll invade the surface with an army of monsters, as he seems to think that the entire planet runs on nuclear energy, and thus the nations of the world will be helpless to stop him. Brushing past how ill-conceived this plan is, it's then that Ben and Sue arrive in the Mole Man's throne room. The former is the first to lunge at the Mole Man, but he's stopped short as the villain rings a bell that summons a gargantuan monster. Thinking quickly, Johnny bursts into flames and flies up to the beast. Yet he simply whizzes around its head like a fly, too fast for it to catch him, but annoying enough to keep it distracted. Now realizing that his monster might fail against the four, the Mole Man desperately tries to escape. But he's not fast enough to outrun Reed's telescopic arm, which grabs a hold of him, albeit in a loose grip, as he's able to ring another bell that summons the entirety of his monster army. Thus the Fantastic Four begin fleeing to the surface through a nearby tunnel, but the beasts are gaining on them. Luckily Johnny then cleverly uses his powers to melt the ceiling behind his teammates. This causes a massive rock slide that seals the tunnel and allows them to escape. Yet in this chaos the Mole Man was able to wrangle himself free from Reed's grasp. But it doesn't seem that he'll be menacing the world any longer, for the issue subsequently ends as the Fantastic Four flee from the Isle in their private jet, while it's destroyed in a fiery explosion behind them. That concludes Fantastic Four 1 and another episode of the Classic Comic Archive. But as always, I would like to offer a brief review of this issue. Overall, I thought that this was a great introduction to Marvel's first family. As fanciful as the story was, this issue did a great job at crafting realistic heroes, in the sense that our four main characters were really just regular people before their accident. Take for example Reed. While it's obvious that he's a scientific genius, it's not as though he's some stoic and infallible leader. Instead he's prideful, overeager, and careless. He's a flawed character, but that's what makes him interesting. The same goes for the other three members, who are imperfect but good-natured people left to wrangle with their newfound power, a dynamic I'm excited to see play out in the coming issues. But I'd also like to commend Mole Man. While his evil scheme didn't make much sense, I can appreciate that the story gave him a believable and somewhat relatable backstory that actually grounds his motivations, a departure from many of the evil for evil's sake villains that I've recently encountered. But in any case, let me know what you thought of this issue and the video, and feel free to suggest other classic comics for me to cover. Thanks for watching.